how many people are actually using Wayland? What percentage of Linux users? This is a question that most people probably don't care about, probably don't think about, probably don't waste more than 5 seconds a year even letting broach their mind. But there are these diehard users on either side, on the X11 or the Wayland side, who are very, very particular about this number and want to know exactly what it is and would prefer it to be in their favor. But it's a really tough question to answer because we don't really have good long-term data collection. When it comes to OS usage, we at least have web metrics. This is StatCounter. People point to this all of the time when talking about the Linux market share, currently at 3.05%. This is obviously not perfect. It's based on what browsers are reporting, and, you can obviously pretend like you're on a different operating system with a browser, but it's at least something, and also it's long-term data, so you can at least compare trends. People also point to the Steam hardware survey. This is obviously going to be flavored more in favor of gamers because it's Steam, but a lot of people don't have a secondary computer, so it's still pretty good numbers. And also, they tend to look relatively similar to what we're seeing over here as well. But as for Wayland metrics, we don't really have this. Now, there are some numbers we can look at, and I'll get to those in just a bit, but one thing I would love to see is adding it to the Steam hardware survey. Obviously, this is a very Linux-focused edition, and wouldn't apply to most other platforms, but considering that Valve does seem to care about Linux, it would be nice to see, although it is a little bit late considering how much adoption of Wayland there most likely is. Firstly though, let's think about this logically. The vast majority of distros and of desktops, those are using X11, and this might be the way that you initially approach the problem. Most distros, most desktops are X11, therefore, most people are on X11. Whilst it's undoubtedly true that the majority of things you can install use X11, this is mostly due to the fact that X11 has been around for a considerably longer time, and there's just a lot of random small projects, window managers, desktop environments, things like that. But when you think about it a bit more, are people really just using, Jimbo's first distro, Bill's window manager? I think it's a pretty established fact, a completely uncontroversial take, that the majority of Linux users are clustered around a very small number of projects. Most notably on the distro side, you have Ubuntu, Fedora, in the enterprise space, more Ubuntu, Red Hat, SUSE. Then on sort of the, next layer of distros, you have things like Debian, OpenSUSE, Arch Linux, maybe Gentoo, and then projects based on all of these. You have things like Mint, Manjaro, PopOS, Bazzite, Zorin, CachyOS, Omaki, SteamOS, and of course I should mention NixOS because someone's going to complain if I don't mention it. Most of these distros default to a desktop that is either GNOME or KDE, which are very obviously, again, uncontroversial opinion, GNOME and KDE are the most popular Linux desktops. I hope no one's going to try to debate me on this point. Now, you might debate me on how popular they are, but the two of them together are very much the most popular desktops. And nowadays, both these projects default to using Wayland. Now, both of them do still let you go back to the X11 version. GNOME is going to be stopping that a lot sooner than KDE, but KDE will be stopping that sometime in the future as well. Then you have Omaki, which does Hyperland, which is obviously Wayland only, SteamOS, which right now is running the X11 version of KDE for its desktop mode, but obviously when you're playing a game, that's running in GameScope, so it's sort of a mix of both. When KDE goes Wayland only, then obviously SteamOS is going to go Wayland only as well. And then some of these distros have basically everything you could possibly want. Arch Linux, Gentoo, NixOS, there are packages for pretty much everything. Fedora and Ubuntu both have flavors and spins, that's the word. Flavors and spins for a bunch of different desktops, but again, most people are clustered around those major versions. And I'm sure on things like Arch, Gentoo, and NixOS, there is a higher proportion of window manager users than you would have on, say, a Fedora or an Ubuntu. But again, with KDE and GNOME being the popular desktops they are, I would be very surprised if they weren't also the most popular options on distros like that as well. However, it is worth noting the most popular version of Ubuntu is Ubuntu LTS. That means the latest version is 24.04. The first version of Ubuntu to, at least first version on this attempt, because they've done attempts in the past, but first version of Ubuntu to be defaulting to Wayland is 24.10, so the version directly after the LTS. When 26.04 comes out, then the main Ubuntu LTS is going to be Wayland. Not Wayland only, but Wayland. With all that being said, what about the numbers? What do the numbers mean? What do the numbers say? What numbers do we even have? One set of numbers we have is from Linux Hardware. This is a site you've probably not heard of, but you may have heard of the tool that they have and the tool that is used to collect this data. Hardware Probe, or HW Probe, or Probe if you're just installing it from FlatHub and things like that. This is a relatively popular tool for just, checking what is on your system, looking at what hardware you have in your machine. This tool is known to be pre-installed on Debian, Arco, and OpenManDriva, which is certainly not the most popular set of distros. Debian obviously is popular, but Arco and OpenManDriva are basically nothing in compared to the size of this. Obviously, a lot of people do make use of this tool, but just running the tool isn't enough. You also have to include the dash upload option. And as you might expect, most people that are doing a hardware probe are not also going and uploading it to a server. So the dataset you have here is going to be very small, and you need to keep in mind that when you have a dataset like this, it can get very skewed very quickly. You're dealing with a very specific kind of person that is running a command like this. Here is just an excerpt of the systems that are being included, and you're going to notice that OpenManDriva appears really, really often. This would lead you to believe that OpenManDriva was actually a really popular distro, whereas what you're actually seeing is it's one of the few distros this comes pre-installed. And obviously you're seeing some other things in between as well, but that is obviously going to very heavily affect any of the data you see. And the data we care about is the Wayland usage data, and well, there's not many computers included in this dataset. This is less than 1,000 systems. And considering that a lot of the data comes from OpenManDriva users, and this defaults to an X11 version of KDE, it shouldn't be surprising that the majority of systems are on X11 according to this data. Like, that shouldn't be surprising whatsoever. Looking further at this, there's a bit of an oddity with this data. So last month, you might assume, is the last month of data, but that doesn't actually align necessarily with what is being shown. So if we go to October, this isn't last month, but the month before, there's about 6,000-ish PCs. The month before that, about 6,000-ish PCs. So you would assume that the last month of data would also have about 6,000-ish PCs, and the fact that it's representing the data like this kind of puts into question everything else being shown here. But you need to keep in mind, this is very, very skewed data. I don't think this data is inherently bad, but looking at this without context can lead you to believe it's saying something that is definitely not saying. Another bit of data people often point to is the Firefox data. Less than 10% of Firefox used on Linux are running on Wayland. This was posted back in 2022. The graph might look a little bit weird, but this is starting at 90%. based on a 1% representative sample of all Firefox Linux desktop telemetry data. Some distributions build Firefox with telemetry disabled, which might significantly skew the results. Long-term adoption trend is lost in the usual weirdness around the holidays, and gfx.linux window protocol hasn't been tracked for long enough. All except X11 are Wayland. So all of this here, this is Wayland, putting it somewhere around 10-ish%, jumping up and down every single month. With this data, keep in mind two very important things. One, a lot of distributions do go and disable the Firefox telemetry, and two, this is 3-year-old data, and we haven't seen a new version of this dataset, so pointing to 3-year-old data and saying, look, nobody uses Wayland, every single day this data gets worse and worse and worse and worse. But Firefox isn't the only telemetry we have. We also have KDE. Now, a lot of this article isn't about what we're talking about, but there is a section on Wayland adoption over time. This data starts in mid to late 2022 and ends in late-ish 2024. We can see the slow progress from under 20% to around 45%, showing the progress as both we and the Wayland ecosystem evolved. At Plasma 6, we switched to default, so there was a little bump in the graph, as can be seen, but 45% still seemed rather disappointing. Filtering on just Plasma 6 reveals the true story. There's still over 20% or so users switching away or using a distro with a different default or having carried over presets, but it's more promising. This puts KDE usage on Plasma 6 around 79-80% at the time. Keep in mind that there are still some distros that weren't using Plasma 6. I believe at the time Kubuntu still had Plasma 5. Also, SteamOS is using the X11 version of KDE, but also telemetry is not enabled by default, and I don't believe most distros go and enable it. So unless a user actually does so themselves, obviously the data can also be skewed by that. This is a much larger dataset than what we see over on Linux hardware. However, it's specifically for KDE users. Is this trend the same on GNOME? Is it the same on various other environments? Obviously, there are environments that are Wayland only or X11 only, so the trend wouldn't be the same there. But at least on KDE, this is how it looks. Also worth noting, because of when this was done, there is less data for the Plasma 6 users. This started in March of that year, whereas the other graph started in 2022. Now, another set of data we have is the polls I ran on my channel. Now, of course, someone is going to say, oh, these polls are skewed heavily in favor of Wayland because your audience probably has a lot of people that like Wayland in it. Understandable. Okay, yes, every bit of data we have is going to be very skewed here. Putting that to the side, 6 months ago is the first poll. This had 14,000 responses, 23% Xorg, 77% Wayland. I ran a more recent poll with the exact same question. This had 10,000 responses, now at 11,000, Xorg at 19%, and Wayland at 81%. As I said earlier, what I wish we had was something popular that people are willing to give their data to, like the Steam hardware survey, that actually could have a big collection of data over time, and we could very easily compare things. Because when we look at Linux hardware, this is a small data set. When we look at Firefox, well, this data is like 3 years old. When we look at KDE, it's KDE data. When we look at my poll, well, obviously it's a YouTube poll, and it's amongst an audience that may like Wayland more than others. I think that's a generally safe assumption. We don't have an actual good set of data to say, you know, is this getting more popular over time? I don't think we would ever have a good, you know, this is exactly how many people, but a trend would be nice. What direction is it going? So I'm sorry that we don't have a good answer, but I guess there's something to think about. And if somebody has a better way to approach this problem, I'd like to hear it. If somebody has some good data I'm not aware of, let me know. I would love to see it. So, if you like the video, go subscribe as well, and if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribes, Daily Barrow Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and... well, what is it? X11 or Wayland?
Money that I don't accept.